Hi, I'm James Shillinglaw, and I'm here once again. It's been a while with Bill McGee, who is an airline expert, and I'm going to he's affiliated with a new group, and I'm going to let him describe what it is. He was formerly affiliated with Consumer Reports, but Bill knows everything about the airlines, and of course, this week in particular, and for the last few weeks, we have been plagued by airline cancellations, and we're going to go and we're going to talk about that. Why it's happening, how it can be solved, if it can, and a whole lot more. And you're going to find out about that on Insider Travel Report. Now, first of all, Bill, great to see you. It's been an interesting summer so far for airlines. And first of all, tell me, you just moved. You're now affiliated with a new group, but tell us a little bit about that and what you do for them.
Absolutely. Good to see you, James. Always a pleasure. Yes, I was with Consumer Reports for about 22 years, first on the editorial side and then on the advocacy side. And Consumer Reports made a decision recently to shut down its advocacy work, but in the airline sector. But I'm really thrilled. I just joined a new group called American Economic Liberties Project, and I'm the senior fellow for aviation and travel. They've been around about 2.5 years. They're very enthusiastic and go-get-'em group, and they were looking to have an airline component for what they do. They're very interested in sort of reining in corporate greed through antitrust, through mergers and consolidation, and of course through advocacy. So with the airline sector, there's a lot to do there.
I know.
I don't think we'll clean it up soon.
Somewhat of a Herculean job, it sounds like you're trying to take
no
on.
Question.
But, especially because there's always something new with the airlines. And that's what we're here to talk about, because obviously our travel advisors out there book a lot of airline tickets, believe me. They're still booked probably over half of them. And they unfortunately have had to deal with this situation with their clients and wondering, why is my flight canceled? And why is this other flight canceled? I have been extraordinarily lucky, and I travel, as you know, I travel quite a lot. So far, so good. I haven't been canceled, but I'm down here actually at a conference in Washington, and a lot of the travel advisors down here that came for this conference, their flights were delayed or canceled. So what the heck is going on with the airlines this summer?
That is the question. What the heck is going on with the airlines this summer? That's all I hear. My phone is blowing up several times a day, and I'm not talking about from media or people in the industry, but from friends and family that are, telling me about flights being extended delays, flights that are canceled, mishandled baggage. It's just a nightmare. I wouldn't say this if it wasn't true. You've been around the industry for a while, so have I. I started working in the airlines, believe it or not, 1985. So I've got 37 years either working in the industry or writing about the industry or advocating about the industry. And I've never seen a summer like this. And, obviously we've been through a lot over the years with 9/11 and wars and pandemic and everything else. But this is pretty extraordinary. And I think I've never seen this level of cancellations before. That's number one. There's a lot to unpack here. So I think we have to sort of take it piece by piece.
Well, let's do this piece by piece, and I'll sort of try to ask these questions. A lot of people, what the airlines say that, they have a shortage of pilots and crew, and that's causing them to cancel flights, or actually maybe not even schedule them. We're going to get into that because a lot of them are pulling back on their schedules, they say, to make everything work. But is it true that there's a shortage of pilots and crew right now?
That's an expression that really sort of grates on me when I hear pilot shortage, because you have to ask ourselves, America has a pilot shortage, the country that invented the airplane. There's 300 million of us. I think what we have, to clarify what the airlines are trying to say, what we have is a shortage of pilots who want to work for the wages that are being offered. That's what we have. Okay. And we've seen this same scenario. You and I have talked about this before. We've seen it with aircraft mechanics as well, right? This industry decimated the maintenance field. And as you know, we've talked about it. All the airlines in the United States now, without exception, outsource their maintenance work, much of it overseas, El Salvador, China, Singapore, Brazil, Mexico. Well, what did that do to our own American mechanics, right? People are not getting into the field. I spoke to a mechanic. He was a mechanic for a major airline for about 35, 40 years. And he told me, my son just got out of the service and he said, Dad, I think I want to do what you want to do. And he said, I told him not to. He said, I never could have imagined I would tell him that. Right. Same thing with pilots. There's a shortage. Yes. But let's ask the follow-up question. Why is there a shortage? The airline industry did this to itself. And I think, we need to have a conversation about that so we don't go down the same path again. And so let's go back to, 2 years ago. The airline industry received as big a bailout, according to the New York Times. It was as much money as any industry, $54 billion, grants, loans. Okay. There was never a question that there would be a bailout. The question was, how much?
Right.
We, as consumer advocates, some of us reached out to Congress and said, look, if you're going to give taxpayer money to this industry, well, let's have some provisions for consumers on refunds and things like that. That didn't make it in. But I think you'll recall only one thing made it into the Airline CARES Act. And that was that the airlines were supposed to keep their staffing up to speed. So that's what
I thought was the deal. That
was the deal. And they accepted the money, right? So now you're scratching your head and saying, what happened? Well, they found a loophole is what they did. They didn't technically lay anybody off because that would have been in direct violation of what, they had promised. But instead, they encouraged early retirements. And so we had this wave of pilot retirements during COVID. Now suddenly, not surprisingly, after 2 years, there's this tremendous pent up demand, as you well know. Everybody wants to fly again. People want to see people they haven't seen in years. They want to get back out on the road. Some of us did a little traveling during COVID. You certainly did, but a lot of people didn't, as you know. Some people haven't been on a plane in 3 years, and now they do. Now they want to do that. To me, James, there's two issues here. First, we have to figure out what happened with this pilot shortage and address it. But that is a long-term thing. Let's be very clear. This is late June. This is not going to be fixed this summer. You can't hire pilots on Tuesday and have them flying on Friday, right?
Not that I'd want them in the cockpit.
Nobody would. It wouldn't be right? So they have to go through all that they have to go through, all the training, all of that. Okay, fine. It's going to be a while. So that's one issue. The second issue is, what do we do in the immediate future? What's happening right now? And this is the part, I'm using strong language, but I'm not being hyperbolic about it. I have to tell you, I've been around this industry a long time. I've never seen a case in which so many flights that should have been canceled in advance are being canceled at the last minute. And that's the part that's unforgivable to me. We have a bad situation and there's a lot of blame to go around on that, and we need to talk about it. But this is not the response. This, how many stories have you heard recently of people in a taxi on the way to the airport or the morning of, getting ready, packing their bags, that are suddenly getting a text, your flight is canceled?
Yeah, I know that.
Now, when I worked in airline flight operations, as you know, I'm an FAA licensed aircraft dispatcher. I used to do this. This is what I did. I worked in operations. We canceled flights. We rescheduled flights. I used to do it all the time. Yeah, we had, thunderstorms in the summer and blizzards in the winter and fog in the fall. That's the way the planet's been for, millions of years now. But the fact is, they're trying to blame this on weather and air traffic control. No. If you put it in pie chart form, it's a very small sliver for weather and air traffic control in recent weeks. This is on them. And this is the part that's unacceptable, is that you cannot be canceling these flights at the last minute. There's no good scenario here. The summer, there's no good scenario. But if the choice is you're going to get a notification that your flight a month from now is canceled, or you're going to get it the morning that you're packed and you have the kids with you and the crying baby and everything else, and you're heading to the airport, which are you going to pick, right? So they have to really, take a deep breath and suck it up and do the right thing. And, I'm always happy to give credit to airlines that do the right thing.
What is the right thing in this?
They have to cancel in advance and they have to notify.
How far in advance would you think that is?
Whatever it takes. In other words, Alaska Airlines, to its credit, I'm giving, I'm calling out credit here. Alaska Airlines in the spring, made announcements that they were canceling, lots of flights, hundreds and hundreds of flights all through the summer. That's what you need to know. Then you can go to plan B, right?
Right.
Again, there's no good scenario here. People are saying like, well, I just was talking to a reporter yesterday who said to me, well, how can we fix this by 4th of July? I said, well, that's not going to happen. We're not going to fix it we're not going to be able to fix it by Labor Day. Forget 4th of July, right? So, first is honesty. Okay. So if the airline industry is out there as their trade group, Airlines for America, the other day, I saw media reports, again, weather, air traffic control. If they're not even acknowledge what the problems are, we have a bigger issue here. There's a problem with, with transparency here of what's happening, right? And I'm talking to reporters. I'm talking to people saying, well, it was weather. No.
No.
Okay. I did this for a living. When I worked in the airline industry, when I was at the shuttle in the Northeast, and I was a dispatcher and I was an operations manager, my nickname was BC McGee. And the B wasn't for Bill. It was Black Cloud McGee. I brought the bad weather with me. On my days off, it was sunny. And then when I came in, they said, oh, no, he's here. Here come the thunderstorms. And
so if they know you were working, they were canceling the flights well in advance, right?
I am not kidding you. It was like they put me on the schedule. People would come in to work with me. Oh, no, you're on today? We wanted to have an easy day, So, sorry, I didn't know that the embedded fog in Boston that's going to sit there for 3 days, that I brought it with me. But so yeah, nobody in the airline industry has to explain to me how weather works and how it affects operations. I did it for a living. I've been inside that beast. I know, but I have to call BS on, saying that this is what this is about. This is not what this is about.
This is all about lack of pilots because they saw too many retire and they haven't been replacing them fast enough. And it's going to take a while to do that. And
other staffing as well, by the way. It's not just pilots, but of course, pilots are the most critical, Some functions you can maybe work around. You can't work around pilots. There's no viable alternative for that. There are some problems with staffing on air traffic controllers nationwide, mostly in the state of Florida. Some of it has to do with vaccinations, et cetera. That's a whole other political issue. But the bottom line is these delays cannot be put on ATC or on weather. This is the airline
really
themselves. You have to own up to it.
Yeah. Now, I guess the other day, I literally 2 days before I was taking a flight to Australia, believe it or not, and 2 days before the flight, I get a notification that we might have bad weather that night. So if you want to change your flight, and I'm thinking, this is pretty early to be telling me this. I didn't do it because I had connections and I only had but do you think this is a symptom of they're trying to get out front almost too far to cancel flights that might be canceled?
Well, so let's talk about how the industry works, right? So if you go into a reservation system, airlines in the United States have reservations available 11 months out. It's 330 days, right? So it's June 2022. You can book a flight May 2023.
Right.
The airlines, but let's just stay with the major airlines. Maybe some of the small airlines don't have a sophisticated technology, but let's talk the big guys. American, Delta, United, Southwest. They have a ton of money invested in state-of-the-art technology for aircraft scheduling, crew scheduling, flight scheduling. They can look 11 months out. Now, of course, common sense tells you it gets harder the further out you look, right? Sure, I'd give them leeway if they have a problem with staffing next May. That's not the problem here. We're talking about today, this week, next week, 2 weeks from now. No one is going to tell me that major airlines with those sophisticated tools and all that money invested in technological aids, that they don't know what their crew staffing is for the next, let's just even make it liberal and say 90 days. Okay. Right. They know. So this is why, I'm saying I'm calling foul on this, because there's no way. I just had friends the other day. They said we were stuck in traffic right outside the airport, and the phone pings, and I'm like, yeah. And they said, what do I do now? It's really tough. What do you do now, right? You try and come up with the best advice you can give, but we all know it's about math. There's just not enough seats for all the people that are flying, right? The load factors this summer are there. The highest load factors the industry ever have, I talk about it all the time, was during World War II when the airlines were basically drafted and, became troop carriers, and the load factors were in the high 90s. We're looking at that now. There's no empty seats anymore.
Was this a case of the airlines not anticipating this sudden return in demand, that they just didn't think this would happen this quickly, and so they were not able to ramp up to meet the demand?
It's an excellent question. I'm not on the inside, so you're asking me to prognosticate. All I can do is take a guess. My guess is, I think they know full well what demand was. They have the big airlines. Again, we won't pick on the small guys. Maybe they don't have the same resources, but the big guys, they have entire departments that just look at worldwide events and national events, and they look at everything. They look at terrorism. They look at the State Department warnings. They look at war. They look at weather. They look at all kinds of stuff, climate. Labor actions. That's their job, is to try and, forget COVID. Even let's pretend things were a few years ago. they have to look at like where are we putting our resources? How many flights a day do we want to have, from city A to city B? When they do that, they have to look at a million factors. I know, people have said to me, well, they were caught flat-footed. I don't buy that. I mean, I don't do this for a living. I don't sit in an office just figuring out what traffic is going to look like from Dallas to Los Angeles. There are people that do that.
But why in that case, why didn't they respond? If they knew what was happening, why wouldn't they have?
I think that's the question. And I think Congress has to ask that. And I want to talk a little bit about the DOT if you'd like. And I think the DOT has to step in as well. But the bottom line is the question that I would ask if I had the authority is to say, why, in fact, do you have flights in your reservation systems that people are booking in real time as we speak? And that even more important than that, they're putting down their credit cards and money is being taken out of their accounts and you're taking this money and earning interest on it when you have a reasonable doubt, more than reasonable doubt that you're not going to be able to operate that. Now, that's a very serious charge that they're offering flights that they know have a very high probability that they're not going to be able to operate. That's why the DOT needs to step in. Congress too, but that can be more cumbersome. So, publicly at American Economic Liberties Project, we're calling on Secretary Buttigieg to step up. We were very happy to see he had a meeting last week with the airlines.
Right.
Finally, we were urging him to do it earlier than he did, but he did it. And let's hope that something comes of it. But the bottom line is, this may be a case of too little too late.
Yeah, well, especially for this summer, if that's what we're
right in terms of the summer season.
Yeah,
you can't have a meeting with airline executives in June to say, let's fix the summer. It's way too, that's a conversation you should have had in the winter.
Yeah, no. Well, I got to ask you one thing. One of the things they blame is COVID. That we have too many pilots and crew who are getting sick. Is that a valid excuse? Is it true, or
let's take them at their word. Okay, well, then that means you have to adjust the schedule. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's like so much of this is opaque and we're not on the inside. I'm not going to call someone a liar. I'm not going to say, well, no, you don't have, maybe you do. But then therefore, why are people getting in their cars and driving to the airport for flights that you can't operate? You know what I'm saying? That's where it all leads back to. And so, this is what we were joking before about the bad weather when I was at the shuttle and all that. Well, the fact is, there were days when we would cancel in advance because we knew, okay, a blizzard's coming. Everything's going to be shut down. LaGuardia, Boston, Washington. Okay, fine. We would then cancel in advance. Other times, you're reactive. Everything's going along fine. 4:00 on a hot July day, there's a thunderstorm. Boom. Maybe it may be an 8-minute thunderstorm, but trust me, it can have 8 hours worth of residual delays and cancellations, right? And at midnight, you're still cleaning up from something that happened at 2 p.m. Well, okay, that was unforeseen. If something is foreseen, then hey, you need to react to it. This is the part that, I keep harping on it because I think it's the crucial issue here. They're failing all of us by these last minute cancellations. They're taking money, they're earning interest on that money, and then they're telling people at the last minute, oh, we can't operate it.
Right.
I don't want to say the reasons aren't important because the reasons are important, but they're almost tangential to what we're talking about here is how are you responding to these problems? You don't have whatever resources it is. You don't have a plane, you don't have a crew, then you need to tell people ahead of time. And that's the part I'm just having so much trouble.
Well, and that's the issue. And I talk to our viewers, our travel advisor viewers, they just want more communication. They want to know farther in advance if something's going to get canceled, because guess what? They can help their clients find a new flight if they know.
Right.
It's a lot harder to do that when you're heading for the airport and you got a flight in 2 hours.
Right. Exactly. And it's all about transparency. Right. And I just last week had a friend. I can't tell you how many stories I've gotten from friends and family recently. And a friend, had a complicated itinerary with multiple airlines. And I said, you know what? I'm strongly advising you to use a travel advisor. I said, this is the type of, it's not, New York to Chicago and back, and it's an easy trip that you could do yourself. This is a complicated itinerary. It's foreign destinations. It's multiple airlines. It's connections. And I put her in touch with an agent that I knew who was very good, and she was happy about that. But having said that, if I still use the term agent more than advisor because I'm old school, and you and I worked at Travel Agent Magazine. It wasn't Travel Advisor Magazine, but
that's right.
You know what I'm saying. But the bottom line is, if they're not getting good info from the airlines, how can they help their customers?
Well, that's the point that I keep hearing from them. We need to get better information and better communication with the airlines. That's what I believe ASTA, American Society of Travel Advisors, now is asking for from the carriers. I just had an interview that's actually up today as we speak with Zane Kirby, where we talk a little bit about that. Zane Kirby is the president and CEO of ASTA. But yeah, it's one of these other things. Now, I guess the other question in tangential with the COVID is part of this, I wouldn't say a sick out, but I keep hearing interviews from pilots saying, look, we are just overworked because there's not enough of us and we're burning out and we have to take a break. And
well, I don't know if you saw, but just yesterday, Southwest pilots at their headquarters in Dallas held a demonstration. They were holding up signs. They were saying that they're frustrated too. And I believe them. They're saying they're frustrated because they're being overworked and, having their schedules altered. And they're saying, I mean, from one of the comments that I read from one of these pilots, he was saying the same thing. He was saying they're getting bad information.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a real loud call for Secretary Buttigieg. This is a guy who has a lot on his plate. We understand transportation's complicated. We talk about airlines, but there's highways and rail and everything else. We get that. It's a tough job. He also has all this infrastructure stuff on his plate, but he has to step up. He really does. Secretary Buttigieg, this is his moment. He has to step up and do something because if, there's no good scenario, as we said, but he has to rein in this industry. There's just if there's no transparency with customers, with travel advisors, with their own employees, the pilots are saying that, then we have an industry that's really broken down here. Well, and it's not one airline, James. It's if you follow it as I do, and I'm sure you do, you see that it's like playing whack-a-mole. Every week, it's a different airline.
Yeah.
A couple of months ago, I was like, oh, it's airline A and airline B. Now it's C, D, E, F, G. Every week it's somebody different.
No, you're absolutely right. And it seems to be, it's been spreading. It sort of happened a bit in previous holiday situations. We saw it. And now just as the summer hits and as people are returning to the skies in record numbers, I think in some cases people say we're over 2019 figures, that we are, real people are going. There's a pent up demand. And that apparently is also almost price resistant right now because the fares, well, we don't get into the fares, but the fares are going out. We were talking about that earlier. The fares are getting out of sight. We lived through 2 years of, wow, I can go anywhere for under $100. It was kind of nutty. But now, no, that day is gone, right?
Right. I actually took a $29 flight last year to Florida.
Yeah, I think I did that too. But now you can still do Florida a little bit, but boy, you're looking at some of those other places and it's back, if not to normal, but to above that. Now, one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that what the airlines started to do, and did this even a couple months ago, they started to revise their schedules and basically changed and reduced the number of flights they had so they could actually, make sure they went out on time. But then we're running into a situation where if they reduce the number of flights and even more people are traveling, the system's going to be overloaded because literally we think everything, the load factors are high now and everybody's returning to the skies. You need more flights, not fewer.
No, I know, but if you can't operate them, what can you do?
That's true.
This is a rock and a hard place. I mean, there's no, like I said, early on in this conversation, there's no easy answers. I mean, if it was, we'd say, okay, roll out those crew that are in reserve,
I think you and I should take pilot training. What about that?
You know what? I do have my FAA dispatch license, but I like being on the ground talking to the guys rather than being up in the air and talking to the ground. But
there you go.
Having said that, you mentioned fares. So I'm working on a project right now for American Economic Liberties Project, and I'm basically taking a look at the industry over the last couple of decades since deregulation, and I've been doing a deep dive on pricing. Obviously I'm close to this industry and you can always learn something new. And really what's emerged to me in recent weeks on this project is, I think there's really two airline industries in the United States. One is, if you live in places like New York and Washington and Los Angeles, you have options. We were just talking about $29 fares to Florida. You have options. And so the question is, well, why is that? Well, there's low-cost carriers and ultra-low-cost carriers, right?
Right.
So whether it's JetBlue, Spirit, Allegiant, Frontier, some of those airlines have problems, service-wise, even safety-wise. That's another discussion. But what is undeniable is they benefit consumers price-wise because they bring fares down. And even if you don't fly, say Spirit, if Spirit's on the route that you're flying and you're on American or United, guess what?
Right.
You're paying less because of Spirit's presence,
Absolutely.
even if you don't fly them. So the reason I say there's two Americas is much of the country doesn't live in New York and Washington and other places, and leisure destinations like Florida and Las Vegas. And this isn't going to be news to a lot of your audience that are out in places where the only game in town are the majors. And they stopped competing head to head a long time ago on price. You and I remember many, many Fridays where we would see fare sale from Northwest and was Continental and US Airways going to match it. And I'd start, I'd start calling the other airlines. Are you going to match this fare? Maybe the fare sale will stick. Maybe it won't. Those days are long over. When was the last time you saw American and United slashing fares against each other, or Delta, right?
Doesn't happen.
It just doesn't happen. If you don't have Frontier there, if you don't have JetBlue, whoever, Southwest, yes. I mean, they certainly, still are a low-cost carrier in many ways. In other areas, they're not. They're in places they never used to fly to. So all of this by way of saying there's really two airline industries. And for those that, don't have low fare service, they're getting gouged. And boy, are they getting gouged in 2022 because, these are some real spikes just since April. I mean, the trend line on fares is going through the roof. So what do you have? You have flights that are more packed than they ever were. You have fares shooting up, which was inevitable. I remember 2 years ago, people said, oh, these fares are going to stay low forever. Yeah, no. If when demand comes back, fares go up. That's not too hard to figure out, right? And then this third factor, which is this is unforgivable. These last minute cancellations. They have to get in front of it if there's any hope of doing something with this summer. It's a terrible thing to be told your flight is canceled. But again, I think I'd rather know a month in advance and maybe I can come up with a plan B than to find out when you're packed and on your way to the airport.
And also, if you have a good travel advisor, you call them and let them find another solution for you, which they might be able to do at this point. Now, I guess I want to touch briefly. I know you're focused really largely on domestic carriers, but this problem is not just domestic. It's international. I just heard the same situation is existing in London, where a lot of people got canceled flights. So this is a problem that global carriers are having, at least some of them, right?
Yeah. In fact, my son was traveling in Europe a few weeks ago, and he was connecting through Amsterdam. In fact, he stayed in Amsterdam for a while. And, that airport, Schiphol in Amsterdam, is usually been a model of efficiency. It was a mess.
Oh, I heard about this. Schiphol was horrible. Yeah, I heard about this. And I was like, did I hear that right? Because it is supposed to be a wonderful airport.
I've long pointed to it as a model of, a 21st century airport. I've been going in and out of Amsterdam for years. And so he had some, he wound up being about 8 hours delayed on his flight back to the States, and missed a connection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, you're right. It's a global problem. But I will say this, and I'm going to put the consumer advocate hat on for a moment. In other countries, you have a lot more protection than you do here, right? This is the Wild West, America.
Yeah, I know the EU is a lot more, regulated in that sense, where they offer also compensation schemes for passengers who have been delayed or flights canceled.
Exactly, and so and that's regulation. That isn't something that's up to the airlines. Here, consumers are at the mercy of the contract of carriage. It's a one-sided contract. The airlines write it for and by themselves, and you take it or leave it, right? That's why lawyers call them contracts of adhesion, meaning you don't get to negotiate with United Airlines and say, I don't like that provision on page 15. You swipe your credit card, you've agreed to all of it, whether you realize it or not, right? So here, this is why some of us have been, doing this drumbeat for 15, 20 years now. With the DOT and with Congress, we need a passenger bill of rights. It's not that complicated. This isn't some manifesto like the contracts of carriage can run 50 pages or more. This is you go to you can Google it right now. European Union passenger protections. It's this long, and it says if your flight is delayed 2 hours, you're entitled to this. 4 hours, this. 8 hours or more, this. Canceled, this. If your baggage is mishandled, if you're involuntarily bumped. And that's it. There's no argument, right? And the interesting part to me is U.S. carriers also have to adhere to it. carriers from all over the world want to fly within the EU,
internationally, yeah, right.
So I had an experience years ago where I was on a U.S. airline based in Atlanta, rhymes with Felta. And, coming out of Brussels, we had a maintenance delay that a couple of us noticed. There was some damage to the plane and we called it out. And it was handled beautifully. And it was handled beautifully because we're in Brussels, not in Atlanta, right? I mean, I'm not picking on Delta. I'm just saying, like, that's how it is. So in the EU, there's rules like that. Canada, I'm happy to say, about 3 years ago, also put this in place. We need to do that here because you're at the mercy of the airlines and they are not treating passengers well these days. So, at American Economic Liberties Project, we're saying we need to have the same type of provisions here. And if this summer doesn't prove it, I don't know what will.
No, absolutely. And we'll have to see what happens now. Now, I guess we're going to get right down to it, but let's close this out by saying what are the possible solutions, both short-term and long-term, that we can see? I mean, you mentioned some things, and obviously the Secretary of Transportation has met with the airlines, is trying to work this out with them. They're trying to work it out. The travel advisors that we go out to are pleading with the airlines for more communication. So clearly more communication in advance is warranted, and let us know what's happening with these things. But what are some of the other factors that might help solve that? One of the things I thought about is we do have a slew of new carriers coming into the market. Which I'm kind of wondering where they're getting the pilots from, but that's another story. We have obviously Dave Nealman's Breeze, we have Avelo, we have AHA, we have things like that, and then even on the foreign carriers, things like just passed through my desk, the new carrier called Norse. Things like that are coming into the market, which is amazing. Again, I'm not sure where they're getting the pilots, but most of these carriers are offering very low fares, and they also are doing city pairs that, quite frankly, as I live in the New York area, I can't fly them because there's no place. Although Breeze is going into White Plains, so we'll see what happens there. But is this a solution that by having these new wave of ultra low cost carriers that are trying to serve city pairs beyond the major cities, that might help?
No question. I think it'll help. And I happen to live in Connecticut, so. Avelo flies out of New Haven, Tweed Airport, a tiny little airport that sometimes doesn't even have commercial service. And Breeze flies out of Bradley in Hartford. So, so I've been on them and I've flown them. And, but I think it's important to remember both of those two, Breeze and Avelo, they started up in 2021.
Right.
Prior to that, the last new scheduled passenger airline in the United States was Virgin America in 2007. Now, that's kind of mind-boggling that we went and Virgin America, of course, is no longer with us.
Alaska,
merged with Alaska, right? Richard Branson was not happy about that, and he made it clear that he wasn't happy. So 14 years without a new airline. Wow, that is unprecedented. I did the homework. I looked it up. The airline industry was started in 1914, so 108 years. We never had a 14-year period without a new airline in the United States. Now, what does that tell you? That's really problematic. Now, in 1978, when the Airline Deregulation Act was passed, it's right there, right in the preamble, right at the top of the legislation. I was just reading it. One of the very first things it said was that this was going to open up the market, that there were going to be new
entrants. That was the idea.
Yeah. And we did see it in the early 80s. We did into the 90s. And then the majors, helped squash most of that, right? So whether it was bankruptcy, whether it was driving them out of town with lower fares, whether it was, mergers and acquisitions in some cases. But, to go 14 years, that's the exact opposite of what deregulation was promised to do.
Right.
If Alfred Kahn was still alive and he knew that there was going to be a 14-year, period without a new airline in the United States, I think his brain would have, exploded. I mean, really, because that is not what we were supposed to have. So you have to ask yourself, they used to always, in the deregulation talks, I've been reading the transcripts from the congressional hearings and everything. They kept talking about the high barrier to entry, that the government made it very hard, the Civil Aeronautics Board in those days, for new entrants. Okay, now we're going to let the free market do it. Well, I would argue that we replaced one high barrier to entry with another, that Wall Street now is the high barrier to entry rather than the government itself, right? Because when you look at it, there's a term that I think comes to play here, and that's common ownership. A lot of investors, they don't just have money in Delta or American or United. They have in all three. And so one of them is a guy named Warren Buffett, right? So
Right.
he just announced, he didn't announce, but it came out that he just recently decided to reinvest in airlines. Well, which one did he invest in? American, Delta, United, and Southwest.
Right.
Happen to be the four largest airlines in the country, right? So do they want to see more Avellos and more Breezes come in, right? So a lot of credit to Avello and Breeze and anybody else that comes along, because it's not easy to get financing for an airline, but they managed to do it.
During COVID, which was interesting to do that. And I guess I give them credit, but I said, why do you think that is happening? We're saying this is we got to have another conversation, because we can talk about this new wave of low cost carriers.
Yeah, that would be a good talk.
They actually, but as we started this discussion, that they could be part of the solution, because now you can get between city pairs that weren't served very well. Right. And the problem is I still can't get my head around their schedules, because it's not close to me, and they haven't started service out of White Plains. But this is a possible solution. Why? How did they do this in the last 2 years? How did they get out of the box?
Yeah, well, again, we're back to that pilot shortage thing. Again, there isn't a shortage of pilots, according to the Airline Pilots Association. They're the largest. ALPA is the largest pilots union in the country, and they just put out a statement. It's worth reading for everybody in the travel industry. It's very enlightening, because they did the deep dive, and they showed how many licensed commercial pilots there are in the United States. That's not to say they're all up to speed on training, et cetera, but that they're out there. When you we're sort of coming full circle to where we started. When you hear there's a pilot shortage or mechanic shortage, to me that's like nails on a blackboard, because to me it's like half a statement.
Right.
It's like there's a shortage of mechanics that don't want to work for minimum wage after putting all their time into learning their craft, and it's obviously an important skill, right? And there's a shortage. We can go back to 2009 and Colgan Air operating for Continental, and that terrible accident in Buffalo, that fatal accident, it changed the rules, right? The whole country was shocked to learn that regional airlines that are operating on behalf of the majors, that first of all, they're separate companies. And as far as the FAA is concerned, they have nothing to do with what's painted on the side of the plane, whether it's, Delta, American, or United, it's a different airline. And that, how low the pay was. And that was a pilot error, that accident in Buffalo. And, there were problems with skills, with training, with hours. One of the first officer had started the day in Seattle and was flying from Newark to Buffalo later that night. This is an industry that when something like that happens, suddenly pulls back, I got to know some of the family of the victims on that, and I interviewed them. I went up to Buffalo and I met with them. They're really extraordinary people, because they're the ones that got that law written. Right. And Captain Sullenberger said the same thing. He said, "I salute these families. They're the ones that did this." Well, what are we looking at now? Sure enough, so it floated, in the airline industry last week. Well, one way we get more pilots if we loosen those standards. That's not the answer. Okay.
No, that is not the answer.
Let's talk about pay and compensation. Okay. It's not okay. We have a shortage here. Let's weaken the safety standards. That'll solve things. No, thank you very much. So, the airlines have to answer these questions. The flights are full. The bookings are backed up out the door. The fares are going up. You're going to have to loosen the purse strings a little and start paying for skilled labor. And this is obviously a very skilled job, and it's a life and death job. So let's do it right. And I think that's what they need to be called on. And they are out there spinning and spinning and spinning. And when I see statements from them as recently as a few days ago saying, well, they're in air traffic control, I'm saying, you know what? They're not having an intellectually honest argument. They're not saying, here are the problems. Let's talk about it. If you're going to say it's weather, then we can't even talk, because we're not even on the same page.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where we are.
Well, let's see. Let's hopefully we can get through this summer, and then the airlines will recognize that what they have to do, and that will start to communicate a lot better than they are now, both to passengers and to travel advisors who book those passengers. Right. And once again, I mean, everybody out there is I'm preaching to the choir here. You as travel advisors out there really need to work with your clients to make sure they can get to their destinations, but you also need the information to do that. and hopefully there's going to be a little bit more of give and take this summer because, we're back traveling. That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
Everybody wants to get back. We can travel internationally now. We don't have the testing coming back in, which is another thing that probably, boosted flights. So we have a great environment to travel in. And now we have this issue. It's like you just when you think you got solved one problem, you got another one. So let's see if we can get through there. Bill, I want to thank you again. You just opened up a whole bunch of topics. I think we got to get back online and talk about this new wave of low-cost carriers, and we have to talk about the big kahuna coming up with the JetBlue Spirit, which deal, which I think is going to happen now. I think JetBlue won't give up, which is another thing you haven't seen in a long time, a hostile corporate takeover of an airline, which is kind of interesting. And of all things, very nice JetBlue. What happened? Why are they? They're hard to believe they're a hostile takeover, Claire, but they seem to. It looks like they may win this out, and we're going to have to see what that means, both for them and for their actually Northeast Alliance, which is another topic. We got a lot of topics.
And I'll leave you with this thought. In our view, at American Economic Liberties Project, we look at all airline mergers as hostile to consumers. So there's a talking point for our next discussion.
Absolutely. Let's schedule that one. And can you, for people who want to know a little bit more about your organization, and you're so new, maybe you don't know what the URL is, but where can they go to find out more about this group?
Sure. economicliberties.us.
Okay, you know it.
American Economic Liberties Project, and there's information there about all of the staff. And like I say, it's a great group. They're very enthusiastic, and they're out there. I'm in my row here, and I'm dealing with airlines and travel, but they're dealing with everything. They're in the midst of all of the talk with big tech and mergers that are happening there, and they've been involved in the baby formula shortages and supply chains and shipping and rail, you name it, and they're in on it. So it's a great group. They're very dynamic, very enthusiastic, and I love it. It's just been the best.
Kind of sounds like your old group, but that's another. We won't talk about that in Consumer Reports. I thought that's what they used to do. But anyway, great to see that you're landed in this great new role. We will be talking, believe me, both online, and I think you're going to come. He's going to I'm doing a show called the International Travel Show this October, and hopefully Bill will show up and bring all of his friends and airlines and have a wonderful panel during the Consumer Days, which I think is going to be October 30th, but at the Javits Center in New York. But we'll certainly talk to Bill before then. I know I will. Again, right. Bill, thank you so much, and good luck. Good luck. I know you're off on a flight yourself, so
right.
Hopefully that flight doesn't get canceled.
Yeah, thank you. Knock wood. Let's hope so. Good talking to you, James.
I'm James Shillinglaw, and this is Insider Travel Report.